What I think is fascinating about this conversation is that, again, whether we're talking about business capability modeling, design, services orientation, product extraction, like we're all fundamentally hunting the same things. It's like we have to figure out how to take big things, break them into small things, reduce dependencies between them, and get them being able to deliver in an economically advantageous way, in a way that we can inspect and adapt and learn. So I think this is just an interesting augmentation to the story that LeadingAgile has been trying to tell for the last 14 years. And one of the things that that I think is neat about what we do is that we've just developed the language around how to manage the change and economically justify it and bring the organization along as we go. So hey everybody, I'm Mike Kottmeyer. I'm the CEO of LeadingAgile. A lot of you guys are probably familiar with different videos that we put out talking about Agile and Agile transformation. And that has really been the core of our business for the last 14 years. Kind of maybe the best kept secret is that over the last 4 or 5 years, we have been building an internal studio and getting more involved in technical work as it relates to decoupling large systems, taking costs out of large systems, optimizing engineering practices. If you're familiar with our methodologies, you might think of that as like what we would call Basecamp 3. Where we're starting to break technical dependencies within larger organizations. We've had a lot of success with some of our clients in that area. And, over the last, 5, 6, 7 years, a lot of our staff is really multidisciplinary and has a lot of background in large systems. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to open up a little bit of a conversation in the space of cloud migration, cloud cost optimization. That is, we're going to tie into this conversation around transformation and Agile and how it all kind of works together. So we've got a group of folks on here that I'd like to introduce you to, and then maybe give them an opportunity to tell a little bit about themselves and their background. So first, I'd like to introduce Matt Van Vliet. Matt Van Vliet and I worked together years ago at a company called Pillar. And when he exited Pillar, came and joined us and became the foundation of our studio. And Matt Van Vliet is the head of that studio and really kind of serves as almost like our chief technology officer. I'd like to introduce Lynn Gretzky. Lynn was actually a former client of ours, and a couple years ago he came in to work in our methodology group and really kind of serves as our chief methodologist at this point. Lynn is responsible for a lot of the work that we're doing around infrastructure and cloud cost optimization, a lot of what we're doing around account analytics and reporting and making sure that we're providing return on investment, not to mention doing a lot of the legwork on a few of our accounts as well. Rick McMichael, who I've worked with for over 20 years at this point, off and on. We worked together back at a time in a company called CheckFree that got acquired by Fiserv. Rick has also been a client of ours and has been really serving in our chief architect capacity for the last several years. So Matt, if you wouldn't mind, tell me a little bit about your background and what your experience is with Agile software, infrastructure. Just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, I started out as a developer and have really worked in software development my entire career. With that said, I had a big focus on testing because what I found very early on was building the system was the easy part. Making it easy to change in the future was hard. So I ended up doing a lot with extreme programming early on and Agile, and have worked for startups that wrote unit testing software, had a consulting company that was all about software development, and now that's what we're doing at LeadingAgile, is not just fixing the governance structure and metrics that are needed to efficiently build software and run an organization, but also looking at the technical dependencies. How do we break those apart and efficiently build software?
Great. Thanks, Matt. So Lynn, tell me a little bit about your background and your history and, maybe even a little bit about why you came to Leading Agile.
Well, thanks, Mike. My work in technology started actually in data science. As an undergraduate, I worked on a project to study political contributions to Illinois legislative candidates. So I got to find out who all the crooks were before they got arrested. And none of the graduate students on the project wanted to use the computer. So I started to have to do all the statistical programming for the research project. And eventually that led to a career in market research where I worked on AI algorithms to figure out how people buy groceries. And as I worked on larger projects, I learned that many of the problems of what caused software not to get built were people related, which enabled me to leverage my academic training as a sociologist to eventually lead large, high risk projects and programs, particularly in the e-commerce space. And so ultimately, I led product development for a travel commerce company where we process over a terabyte of data a day, handle 15 billion messages a day, and help people buy travel arrangements. And that's where I got connected with LeadingAgile as a client to help us plan our agile transformation. And so, my interest in LeadingAgile is that as I've helped large companies build better software faster, that helping them learn how to economically value what they're doing and make decisions about how to organize and deliver great products and that make profit and scale their profitability as customers use them, is something that I wanted to share with other companies.
Yeah, one of the favorite expressions that Lynn talks about internally all the time that I've adopted is this idea of executive sociology, and I think there's something really to that, right? Because so much about change and change management, whether it be technology transformation or business transformation, really is about aligning people and aligning incentives and getting people all moving in kind of the same direction. So I actually really appreciate that, Lynn. Rick, tell me a little bit about you and your background and how you arrived here at LeadingAgile.
Yeah, I come from the technology side of the house. I started out in college building mill automation equipment for textile mills and wielding soldering irons and building control circuits and then programming an assembler and all that. So just from the very beginning, I've been involved in that. Now, my career led me largely through financial services and moving money, systems that move money around. People get really funny around money. It's got to work. It's got to work right. It's got to scale. It's got to always be there. So lots of lessons there over the years about building ever more largely scaled applications that can run in a very fault tolerant fashion, run across the entire nation, some things globally. So just lots of lessons there about learning how to scale and sort of systems thinking and large scale systems design. Built architecture organizations over the years and managed the architecture of some of these applications. And somewhere along the way, we started to learn that the architecture of the people in the organization was as important as the architecture of the systems. And that's where our paths crossed in terms of leading Agile, because in the early days of Agile, we started experimenting with those practices like extreme programming and then figuring out how are we going to do that with multiple products? How are we going to do this with multiple teams? How are we going to do it in multiple cities? How are we going to do it in multiple countries, right? So there's a scale component to that too, just like there's a scale component to technical systems. And so that's kind of how I cut my teeth in Agile. And a lot of us had relationships that came out of that era. And ultimately, it became interesting to come to Leading Agile and start helping companies learn how to take that systems approach and how to scale themselves and get better business results.
Yeah, one of the reasons I really appreciate Rick is I was working in Rick's organization when I first got introduced into Agile, and I was in the PMO and working with one of the directors on his team. And Rick, I don't even know if you know this, but you basically let me expense every book that I wanted to read on Agile, and so I read everything. Right, I read everything, and so a lot of the early underpinnings of the leading agile approach, and how we think about teaming strategies and using Kanban and lean governance to orchestrate across teams and to tie up into portfolios. All of that early thinking came out of the work that we were doing in these really, really large, complex systems. And it's really funny because, gosh, this was back in like 2003 or something like that, I think was when we were working together right after the signing of the manifesto. And everything in the agile world was about small teams. And I was just like, we were working on such complex systems, and this idea of cross-functional teams that had, we had databases and front-end systems and mainframes and reporting engines and risk modules and just all this craziness, right? And I'm like, how in the world am I going to get everybody onto a single team? Right. And so we were exploring teaming strategies, basically organizing around components and services. And we were going through David Anderson's early stuff on Kanban, Kanban systems for software engineering. Reading all the Eli Goldratt stuff. And so a lot of what's persisted 22 years later is really a legacy of all that stuff that we were doing back in the financial services way back when. It's actually really cool. The history.
Very, very cool. Very much a privilege to trace that arc. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really neat. Yeah, and so what I thought would be interesting pulling this group together, I wanted them to introduce themselves because, we are known as an agile transformation company, but there's a lot of domain expertise in this that we do. We talk about really simple things: teams, backlogs, working tested software, structure, governance, metrics, expeditions to base camps, because we really try to make it pretty simple for people to understand, get their heads around. And, because if it's not simple and straightforward, then it's very difficult to get people to move in that direction. But as you might imagine, when you're looking at the architecture of organizations and the architecture of complex systems, and you're trying to get alignment between teams and technology and decouple dependencies and create governance models and things like that, there's a lot of complexity that goes up underneath our traditional marketing messages. And so as we've gone down this path with Matt and starting the studio a few years ago, and we started getting really deep into some of the technical issues that our clients are facing, one of the big challenges that we're seeing right now is in this idea of it's like costs are out of control, whether it be in the cloud or whether it be on infrastructure. We're starting to hypothesize, like, how can we start to take costs out of the system? How can we start improving the engineering environment so that we can actually create the conditions in the organizations that we're working in to actually achieve greater business agility? Our initial hypothesis in market was really, because of my background, candidly, in project management, organizational design, and, flow-based systems and things like that. We really started with this idea of Basecamp 1, where we would, come in and stabilize the system, put in a team-based structure, put in governance and structure, and, tie it up to, investment strategy and things like that. We had a lot of success. We got a lot of companies to a place where they could use Agile to deliver incrementally and iteratively over time. Then we kind of evolved our Basecamp model and started really blowing out Basecamp 2, which is really about reducing batch sizing and starting to get teams to deliver more quickly into market. That's not just a technical problem. That actually ties up in terms of like investment strategy and the size of the bets you make in your portfolio and those things. And really kind of the third step in our process was, starting to decouple dependencies. And as you might imagine, there's dependencies all over an organization. I talk talk about all the time that dependencies kill agility. But a lot of those dependencies are organizational dependencies, but more often than not, a lot of them are technical dependencies. And over the years, often we would go in to do a transformation and get to Basecamp 1, Basecamp 2, and then we'd really kind of hit a wall with Basecamp 3. And so what we've been, because sometimes transformation budgets are different than the technology budgets or what have you, they're being driven out of different parts of the organization. And so one of the pivots that we're making and really have been for the last couple of years is, what if we could take a little bit more of a technology forward approach? And in that technology forward approach, we start to think about engineering optimization. We start to think about refactoring legacy applications. We start to think about, just basically how do we take big things and break them into small things so that that we can wrap teams around them. And so kind of as we've been going down this path for the last couple years, you start to encounter the broader IT organization and some of the challenges that broader organization is facing. One of the big topics right now is cloud migration, cloud costs spinning out of control. And so, a lot of times what we end up with is the opportunity, if we can take costs out of the infrastructure and cloud, we can use those savings to start thinking about strategically refactoring that code base. And then that leads to more of the enterprise transformation and agility. So we're just exploring some different paths. So today what we wanted to do is we want to set up a conversation where we start with that lens. So rather than talk about teams, backlogs, working tested software, and expeditions and base camps, we're going to talk about some of the broader challenges that we're starting to see in market around cloud costs. And so we're going to start the conversation basically with the question of why do we move to the cloud? And then as we progress, we're going to work our way into some other topics and what some of the alternatives and some of the alternative strategies are in the marketplace. So Lynn, talk to me. What are the business drivers behind people moving to the cloud?
Well, organizations have a number of reasons to move to the cloud. One is when they want to move from a capital expense heavy environment to one that's more driven by operating expenses. Cloud resources allow you to move from fixed upfront to a variable expense structure. Next is organizations are looking to shrink the size of their data centers, and cloud computing allows you to eliminate having to run your own data center if you move everything to the cloud. Next is a benefit around guessing capacity, because if you're buying compute and storage and networking for a data center, you have to make big guesses up front, and sometimes those guesses are wrong. And then finally, benefiting from economies of scale. If you're a smaller company, you're not going to be able to buy the underlying raw infrastructure as cheaply as a cloud provider can purchase it.
So Rick, tell me a little bit about your perspective on why people move to the cloud.
So I think all the reasons Lynn just gave are the foundations of it. There's some additional things as well. By moving to the cloud, I put it in a place where I can use more contemporary things. There are services in machine learning, artificial intelligence that are available in those environments that would be very, very difficult to do in your own infrastructure. So you gain access to these specialized capabilities. You also position it in a way that you can more flexibly interact with services of some of your partners, right? Those things are going to be easier to connect to, easier to flexibly utilize.
Tell me a little bit about what you mean by connecting to partners more easily.
Sure. If I have a business partner, right, another company that I'm interacting with to deliver my service, let's say, maybe I'm an insurance company and I want to utilize a payment service from another provider. Well, chances are the payment service has already provided a series of interfaces that make it easy to do it if you're in one of the cloud providers, whereas it would be more effort for you to build it on your own infrastructure.
Okay. Matt, tell me a little bit about why people move to the cloud.
I think there's technical and financial reasons. I also think there's business reasons that will drive people to the cloud. So as a business person out there, they'll look at something and say, that company didn't exist 2 years ago. How have they built all of that infrastructure this fast? Or this cloud native company that may have been around for years, how come they can put so much more software out than we can? And a lot of the answers start to be like, we have better lead time on getting the hardware. There's more services available. There's accelerators, and there's all of these reasons that the cloud is providing other organizations great benefit, and organizations, naturally want to move and get some of those benefits.
Okay. So, Lynn, one of our observations in the market is that most of the time, if not all the time, all the time is hard to say, right? But most of the time it seems that when somebody moves to the cloud, it ends up costing a lot more than maybe what they expected or planned for. Could you talk to me a little bit about some of the drivers that are causing some of those costs to go out of control?
Sure. One of the big drivers is that of the half a dozen or so different migration strategies to move applications to the cloud, the one that's most frequently leveraged at the beginning of a cloud migration is rehosting, which is also known as lift and shift. And under this strategy, you take your application, you move it sort of as is to the cloud, and what happens is you wind up bringing with the app all the inefficiencies and underutilized capacity that you had with the application in the organization's data center. Additionally, other sources of cost overruns are these applications can bring with them expensive third-party purchased applications, such as legacy database management systems. And these are going to be as expensive to operate in the cloud as they are in an on-premise data center. And then the other piece is, to quote an old Yogi Berra aphorism, it ain't over till it's over, is if you move stuff to the cloud and you're not able to shut down the associated infrastructure within your data center, you're going to be spending more, not less. And so it requires an incredible amount of discipline to ruthlessly shut down servers, storage, turn down the networking, and release operations personnel when you move an app to the cloud.
So, Rick, what is your take on why cloud costs are spinning out of control when folks do this lift and shift thing?
I think part of it, Mike, may be even non-technical. It's not necessarily bad code or bad design, but it's all the decisions that led for you to get into that circumstance in the first place, and not being able to chart an architectural roadmap and transform from current state to the cloud native state in order to take advantage of the services on the cloud. And so that problem kind of existed before you moved to the cloud in the first place. Right? There's a reason the application got into a monolithic state. There's a reason that it's not being efficient in its use of resources. And it's as much our ability to govern the thing and make decisions about where we're going to invest our time and energy as it is the technical component. A lot of times it's the tyranny of the urgent. We have customer demands we have to meet. We have contractual obligations we have to meet. And those pressures come in and we make expedient decisions in order to meet those timeframes, and the structure and the health and hygiene of the application suffer because of it.
Matt, tell me a little bit about, from your point of view, your perspective, why cloud costs go out of control when folks move to the cloud.
So the way the cloud is designed is to allow a set of loosely coupled services scale independently, and therefore you're only spending lots of resources on the components that you need to scale. Before you even move to the cloud, you could build an application that has a loosely coupled set of services and scale some of them on your servers and not scale others. but most organizations don't have that as a starting point. So whether you're in your data center or in your cloud, you're not able to efficiently scale the application. So ultimately what we find is that if you break up that monolith into components, you can scale the parts that need that high bandwidth and not incur the additional costs on the other components.
So Lynn, talk to me a little bit about some of the other costs associated, whether it be with on-prem infrastructure or with cloud, that can drive up costs that aren't specifically, scale related or monolith related. Some of the things we talk about are things like, labor costs, that kind of a thing. Tell me a little bit about where people get into problems with that aspect of cost.
Well, one perspective is that if you move workload to the cloud and do not shut down the associated infrastructure components, you're going to still need the operations staff to operate it. And sometimes that happens when within a data center you specify certain application servers as backups for other applications, to manage your resiliency and business recovery. And then, if server X is a backup for application Y, in a cold failover scenario, you can't get rid of that server even if you're not using it regularly. And then you need the operations staff to be able to manage it. Another area where costs have a tendency to run out of control is that if your developers, or particularly with the rise of a lot of machine learning and AI work, your data scientists have the ability to spin up resources, whether they're compute resources or storage resources, that the machine learning algorithms can easily generate a lot of cost that is unplanned, because it's kind of hard to predict with some of these models how long it takes to train a model and the capacity you need to effectively train it. And then if you don't turn these one-time use resources off, you wind up with thousands of dollars in charges for resources that, just because you weren't paying attention to them, you're consuming them.
So Rick, what's your take on some of the maybe non-application related, maybe labor related costs that are driving expense in the cloud?
So just because the application is in the cloud, we still have to operate. We still have to engineer it. We still have to maintain it. We still have to have all those ITIL practices around monitoring and alerting, responding to outages and events, problem management, all those things. They still exist. But when we move to the cloud, we've got to learn how to do those things more efficiently. And I think part of that is we need more T-shaped people, more specializing generalists. There's a tendency in infrastructure to silo disciplines into, all right, these are the virtualization people, these are the storage people, these are the networking people. And I think when we move to the cloud, we need to start looking at it more in a converged or hyper-converged kind of model, where I can use some of the tools in the cloud to do things more easily than I could in the past. Because the tools in the cloud are a little more democratized. So maybe I can get people to begin to support multiple disciplines. And this may actually be a controversial opinion, but it's part of the convergence strategy, is to be able to have people that can support more things. So I have more economy then, because I don't have to have groups and control structures around those groups that are necessary when things are siloed.
Matt, what's your take on what's driving cloud costs, or maybe labor-related costs in the cloud that aren't specifically application-related?
Yeah, I think a lot of it's because it's new, and there's a bit of a paradigm shift, and if people haven't organizationally been able to shift to that, then you've got kind of the legacy organizational structures dealing with the newness of the cloud. So, a couple examples are like if people are wanting to do AI and do experimentation, we want people to be able to try things, but we need to do that within some level of control. So understanding and just learning the tools to where we can set budgets, we can set controls so things can't get out of whack, in a great way, but we also don't have to lock things down to the point where no one's able to innovate. I think another big trend that's happening, and it's really true whether you're going into the cloud or you're doing things on-prem, is infrastructure as code. So now we can automate most things that we used to do manually. 30 years ago when I was putting a system in, I had to show up with, for my upgrade, a list of 100 steps that some operator had to do in order to get my new enhancement into production. That should all be automated today, where the same set of steps that got me from dev to QA should take me from QA to production. And that configuring not just my application logic, but my infrastructure with code is a new discipline that is something that's, important to make the right transition. Now, general purpose coders aren't going to understand the implications on the cloud cost or implications on the database or implications on storage of some of the things that they can easily automate. So you have to have all of those specialties still available to look at it, but you want to be able to leverage them in a way that it's almost a way the teams can consume those, but then they can automate and do most of the work for themselves.
So Lynn, so we've established this idea that cloud costs are spinning out of control. We've talked about some of the factors that are driving that. We're starting to see a bunch of articles about people moving off the cloud or maybe moving into hybrid environments. Give me a little bit of your take on where you see the industry moving in that regard.
Well, everyone is looking at what they were promised versus what results are they getting, and as thousands of organizations move work to the cloud, they're finding that generally speaking they're not getting the results that they expected. So a natural reaction is like, well, maybe we just move stuff back into the data center. The problem is that if you had problems in the data center, you moved it to the cloud, and you've got the same problems in the cloud that you had in the data center, maybe the location isn't the root cause of the problem. And so what you really need to do then is understand and shift your thinking from infrastructure as a commodity to infrastructure as a contributor to enterprise value, and then use that view to deploy assets accordingly, either in the cloud or in an on-premise data center.
Yeah, Rick. So tell me a little bit about your take. We've established that costs are going out of control in the cloud. We're starting to see clients talk about, we're starting to see articles around maybe moving off the cloud and moving back into more of an on-prem environment. Tell me a little bit about, from your perspective, what is driving that move?
Well, there are always trends in the industry, and there are always hype cycles. The migration to cloud followed that pattern. Now that we're there, ideas start to flow through there. A lot of companies are not seeing the results that they thought they were going to see. And so, the next move is, let's talk about moving applications back to our own infrastructure, repatriation. Some people use that phrase. It's also will be a trend and a sort of thought that's going through the industry. But the reason that you move something to the cloud in the first place didn't go away. And if you move it back, then you're going to largely, is that really the right idea to move it back? If there was a problem before, that problem is still going to be there. So I think a rational approach would be to look at the estate of applications that we have moved to the cloud, look at them individually, prioritize them based on some criteria. One of the things we like to use at LeadingAgile is capability modeling and capability analysis. Right? Take a look at things and say, what is its relevance to strategy? How well is it performing in its role? And can I evolve it at the pace or at the economics that the market require? Now I can establish some priorities, because we only have so much capacity to invest in fixing something at any given point in time. So let's find the things that are going to generate the quickest return. They're going to maximize my benefit. And then take those quick wins. Once we've fixed those problems, we can take the savings from that and we can use that to help transform the rest of the roadmap. So if we look at those on a component by component basis, on an application in the estate, if we look at each one of those, now I can start making decisions about this and what is the right thing to do. And there may be some circumstances where the economics are such that it would be better for me to have infrastructure that I own and manage myself. But I suspect that's a very, very small and specialized percentage of the time, that most of the workload should be in the cloud and can stay in the cloud. And if we architect the application appropriately for the cloud, so we can take advantage of the benefits there, then I can get the return, and even more than what I expected in the first place. So that was kind of a long answer, but the short answer is it's not a monolith. Don't take the whole thing. Take it a piece at a time. Look at it, and maybe some things should be in there in infrastructure, most not.
Yeah, and then some things that organizations often fail to account for is the hidden costs in the resiliency they don't currently have in their on-premise data centers. Is that if many organizations, if they did the math on what it would cost to have fully resilient data centers, that they have millions to tens of millions of dollars in unspent money that they're managing as business risk and don't know it.
I think whichever direction you're moving, there's a set of migration strategies, right? So one being replatforming or lift and shift. And, the challenge with that is you're not going to get to take advantage of the platforms, or if you're trying to have a hybrid model, you're really not set up to have some components in one location, some in another, or what have you. Another strategy is let's just rewrite it to be cloud native or microservice enabled or whatever the buzzword you want to use. The challenge with that strategy, of course, is that it's very expensive and there's a lot of things to be addressed. So whichever direction you're moving, what we would advise is look at your business capabilities. Let's get that model and then understand how your systems align to those business capabilities. You may find that one system has 5 business capabilities in it, and it would be beneficial to find the seams and extract those products or extract those business capabilities so that you can move some of them, or even whichever way you're moving things, that they're able to scale and work independently. You may also find that you have a business capability that actually exists in multiple systems. And again, that may be the case where either you need to move all of them or consolidate them or what have you. But in the end, we don't think it should be should I rewrite all of it for the cloud, or should I lift and shift it as is? We think that you need to have a mechanism and a strategy to be able to make the decision around different areas of your system or different areas of your business. The challenge is most people don't have a framework for how to think about that, so they don't really know how would we work through moving some things and not moving others? And then they don't have the engineering disciplines that know how to do that safely. And that's where I think organizations are going to need to grow and learn so that they can take advantage of the cloud when it's appropriate. They can take advantage of on-prem when it's appropriate. And more importantly, they can have their systems that need to move at the speed of the business, make those levels of change, and they can compete going forward.
So you were talking about the idea of rewriting into cloud native or more of a services oriented. That's an approach that people take, right? It's kind of the other side of the pendulum swing from a lift and shift is a total rewrite. What are the challenges with the total rewrite, and why might you want to consider something different along the lines that we just talked about? So talk to me about the challenges of a total rewrite.
A lot of times, if it's a simple system that you can just rewrite, that may be the right decision. But if it's a complex system that's grown up over years, the amount of time it'll take to rewrite the entire system will mean that you'll either be working with two systems, or you're going to find that it's more and more complex than you thought. So it tends to be a big risk to take, a 1,000,000 line of code system and then just decide to rewrite the whole thing. So unless your industry has changed, unless core strategies have changed, unless business rules have changed, a lot of times it's going to be better off to break that into pieces and identify which of those pieces truly need to be advanced, and have those pieces be the ones you rewrite or dramatically change, and the other systems you encapsulate with tests and other protections, and then you can carry them forward, taking advantage of your prior investment.
Rick, tell me a little bit about some of the challenges you see with the idea of doing a total rewrite of the system.
Well, they're very risky. And there's a tendency to want to say, okay, I'm going to have this like Apollo moonshot style project where I'm going to take this big thing that was developed over 20 years and we're going to rewrite it in a fixed period of time. Those things are just really, really risky. And a lot of times they fail, or they become unfinished journeys. And now you're in an even worse place because I've got two things going on and I haven't gotten rid of either one of them. So the end result's actually worse than where you started. So this thought that I'm going to take this thing and rewrite it in a fixed period of time is just, it's tempting because of urgency and the desire to just do it once. But it's a lot safer to take that thing apart and do it, develop a strategy where I'm doing it a little bit at a time, where I am identifying the capabilities around domains. I pull those things out. I create a contract around it with an API or events or messages. I put tests around that will verify that contract. And now I have this thing that is safe for me to work on now without disturbing everything else. And so I take that piece and I do another piece and I do another piece. And so if I do that over a period of time, I am transforming it in place into the future, which is a really nice muscle to develop because it's kind of what we should be doing all the time.
Well, and
I shouldn't have an application that was developed over a 20-year period of time that became a monolith that nobody wants to touch because they're afraid if they touch something over here is going to break a few days later, right? There's reasons why we got in that shape. So we want to learn these practices and principles. They will help us transform the application into a more modern, supportable architecture. But also, it's not a project, it's a lifestyle at this point. You always think about these systems when we create them. When I make one of these things, I've made a puppy. I have to take care of it now. I have to feed it. I have to train it. I have to, as it gets mature, eventually gets old. So I have to manage this thing over its lifetime. So these are great disciplines and muscles to learn because once we get it in the shape, we get it in the cloud, we're getting the benefits. We actually have to keep caring about the health and hygiene along with the functionality and the features as we evolve the thing in the future.
There's a great quote I heard from Bob Martin one time from a keynote that he did, and it was kind of a joke, throwaway comment, but he said something like, "If we would have known how long this software was going to be in production, we probably would have spent a little bit more time on how we architected it." I always thought that was kind of a funny thing. Matt, were you going to add something?
Yeah, just that, the great thing is that the way we're saying to modernize your application and do it incrementally is the least risky way to do it. And it ends up with something that's ideally suited to efficiently scale in the cloud. So taking it in the low risk incremental way, done properly with the right level of engineering discipline, actually makes it an ideal candidate to be something that can last over the long haul, scale as needed, and be reused across your organization.
Lynn, there was something that Rick said just a moment ago that kind of triggered the project manager in me. It's like we want to get it all done. We want to do it within fixed time. Obviously, the scope is fixed because it's the whole application. We want to do it for a known cost. One of the things that we see a lot is that these total rewrites of applications go way over budget. What are some of the complexities that lead to total rewrites going over budget?
You don't know what you don't know. That in many of these legacy applications, they have poor test coverage and inaccurate or missing documentation of the requirements. And so it's like an archaeology expedition to go figure out how to rewrite this stuff. So, for example, once I took over responsibility for a rewrite of a ticketing and reticketing application where you had to figure out what the business rules were by actually running the reticketing pricing to verify the new system versus the old system and go debug why you didn't get the results you expected. And so this idea of strategic refactoring, where we take out a component, we surround it in characterization tests to understand what its behavior is, and then pull out element by element and to be able to verify that the original behavior is supported, reduces the risk when you're modernizing these applications.
Yeah, so I'm going to pull a thread, and this is a wild card thread. I'm going to kind of see how you guys respond to it. So I have this kind of pet idea that I've been playing with, and I've been in the business capability world. So Matt talked about the idea of understanding your business capabilities and refactoring your applications into those business capabilities, right? So then we have the holy grail of agile teams as encapsulated business entities and encapsulated technology entities, right? So I have this kind of pet idea I've been exploring about the relationship between domain design and business capability modeling. And kind of my hypothesis, I don't think it's exactly true, but kind of my hypothesis is that what the technology world is trying to describe with this idea of domains and domain-driven designs, that there's actually like a relationship, or at least an idea that's connected between the idea of domain design and business capability modeling. Matt, I'd love your take on that. And again, just pulling a thread here. So what do you see as a relationship between domain-driven design and business capability modeling? Any thoughts?
Yeah. When we're writing software, we try to model it on the business problem, not on the technology. So we don't want software that knows what server it's running on, what type of database it's talking to, whether it's running in your laptop or your phone, or whether it's running in the server. We'd like it to not know all those things. So then we have to have it grounded in something. So we've come up with this idea of domain design that say, well, it looks like you have customers and you have airplanes and you have bank accounts, and let's design around that. Now, ultimately, organizationally, we have capabilities or domains within the organization. What's a challenge is when we design around a domain and we get it wrong. What we find is that it needs to go in one direction because of one business need, and it needs to go in a different direction because of a different business need. So if we align those domains with the business capabilities, then, if as the business capability changes, the business is naturally focused on that capability, and our domain would then be pushed along by the same area of the business. So it should remove some of those dichotomies. Now, of course, we can have a business capability today that, because of technology or because of the market, is disrupted, and it's now two capabilities, and one needs to change at a much more rapid pace than the other. And then we have to change how the business is organized as well as the software. But if we can have them be aligned, when it's not something that's industry changing, then they should be moving at similar paces. And the stuff that's in the strategic plan for the business would fit nicely, within the business architecture and the software architecture.
Rick, same question. Do you have any thoughts on the relationship between those two schools of thought?
Only that I don't have a formal equivalence to draw on this, but only in that we tend to think
I don't think a formal equivalence actually exists. I think it's like two domains solving the same problem, right?
Yeah, well, they're applying sort of different approaches in different scopes. If I think about business capabilities, I'm thinking about pretty coarse-grained things in the organizational structure of the company, right? A capability being the combination of people and process and technology that deliver some unit of value for the business. And so that could be something like finance is a capability, marketing is a capability, product delivery is a capability, and then we can have some business specific capabilities. Let's find a payment company. It might be clearing. It might be settlement. Right. It might be authorization.
Really yeah.
So I've got a series of business capabilities. When I think about domains, I'm thinking about maybe the entities within those capabilities that are being modeled to deliver the technology part or the process part, even the organizational structure of the people part of the capability. So I think there is a good, strong relationship there. But I also believe the industry is probably finding its way around the specifics of that relationship right now.
Yeah, for sure. One of my first use cases of ChatGPT is I was having a conversation with it about those two different domains, and are they equivalent? How are they the same? How are they different? What are the issues? What are the risks? And then I asked it if anybody was thinking this way. Was there any other research, academic or otherwise? And I don't think the industry is thinking this way. But I think, to Matt's point, what is fascinating to me is I think the concept of what domain-driven design is trying to solve, and what the concept of business capability modeling is trying to solve. If we could align those two things, then I think we get technology aligned with the business in a more powerful way. Lynn, any thoughts on that you'd like to add?
Well, and it allows you to economically justify the value of your investments. That, the way I like to think about a business capability is that combination of people or roles, like Rick said, business processes, and then other kinds of assets. So Rick talked about the technology, but a capability may have physical assets like stores. So if you have a retail business, you've got stores, you may have call centers, and those physical assets also support your capability. And together they generate measurable value. So capability generates benefits and a capability generates costs, and therefore you can treat it like an asset to to grow its value, i.e. benefits minus costs, over time. And how that then ties to the domain-driven design is a capability needs, one or more domains of information that it uses to deliver value. And when we can centralize and build once and only once each domain and its encapsulated behavior, then we can improve not only the cost to build and maintain that capability, but also improve the consistency of the customer experience and therefore the quality of the capability.
Yeah, totally agree. So I think is fascinating for anybody who's watching this, whose home base might be Agile. A lot of my thinking of this evolves from just a really, really simple observation. It's like if you're going to do Scrum, right, team level Scrum, the ideal container for team level Scrum is I've got 6 to 8 people. I've got a product owner that represents the business. That team has a business problem to solve. They can produce software independently, get feedback, release it into market, that kind of a thing. When you start dealing with organizations at scale, like the technology infrastructure doesn't support that. The business infrastructure often doesn't support that. So I think what we're kind of hunting down is this idea. It's almost like a defined pattern language in a way for being able to align business and technology, and then ultimately create the conditions where that organization can do Scrum. And another little bit of industry thinking that I've been playing around with is this idea of composable enterprise. I don't really talk about it that much, and I don't actually see a ton of it written, but I almost think of it as like a services-oriented organization, right? Where the business capability is a composable service that can be consumed by other parts of the business according to contracts or service levels or something like that. I know it might not be a gigantic leap, but I know that's a little bit of a leap from where I was taking it. Lynn, do you have any thoughts on the composable enterprise and how it relates to some of the topics that we've been exploring?
Well, as we think about the evolution of business, the need to be able to deliver new products and services in new ways in shorter time frames, the more granular our business capabilities are. And if we can not only build them and operate them as discrete units where essentially each capability can be run on its own P&L, we can then combine them in new ways to deliver products and services 60 to 80% faster than when you're building new capabilities from scratch.
Yeah, awesome. Rick, any thoughts?
Yeah, it's just when I have that flexibility now, when something comes along in the industry, like the latest thing is artificial intelligence and large language models and every company is wrestling with what does this mean for me? How can I assimilate it? How can I take advantage of it? If I have a company that has that architecture that's been designed that way, then I can decide what has to be impacted, where, what capabilities have to move at what speed to be able to embrace this and take advantage of it. It just puts me in a position where when these opportunities come along, I can take advantage of it. I think everything has an architecture, and getting back to the architect in me, right? If we look at architecture as being the division of something into its subsystems and components, the contracts that they expose, and then how they relate to each other, that's all we're talking about here. It's just now the company has an architecture. And in a lot of cases, companies have an accidental architecture because it just happened as a series of decisions. And, we started the company as a startup, and then it grew, and then we bought another company. We got acquired by a company, and we got all this stuff that came in, and just kind of just happens over a period of years. Whereas what we're talking about here is becoming intentional about that, having intentional composable architecture for the company.
Yeah, I'm going to go back to Lynn for a second. Lynn, you said something to me that was interesting, right? In this kind of composable enterprise kind of world, you can look at the P&L of the technology assets, and you can actually start to understand kind of the business value of the investment that you're making. I have an advisor that I've been working with for the last couple of years who wrote a paper about 30 years ago on the idea of, it's been a minute, right? He wrote an idea, he called it virtual outsourcing. And what he was really getting at is that one of the reasons why we go down the outsourcing model is because we want to basically take a part of the business and give it to another company to run, right? Whether it be onshore or offshore. Mm-hmm. Would you just click down one level for me? So assume we have a business capability, assume we have an encapsulated technology domain. What opportunities does that create for us in terms of being able to manage the P&L of that business capability?
Well, we can look at the cost per unit of work. We can look at its error rate and quality. We can and then look at its scalability. And then essentially do what they call in purchasing management value engineering, of looking at every part of the capability, its business processes, the roles that you have in it, the technology and other assets, and look at what those components cost, and identify opportunities to simultaneously take cost out and improve quality.
Yeah, I think there's also an interesting, when you reduce the complexity of the system and you have people optimized within these encapsulated units or these composable units, my guess is that they can take a lot of proactive ownership over value engineering it themselves, right? Maybe it's not self-organization in the truest sense, but it's almost like you have people that now own that P&L and can start to think about how to optimize it themselves rather than externally and unilaterally.
That's right. And for example, in one case, I led an e-commerce transformation in a large manufacturing organization where originally the process to buy a configurable product took 57 clicks. And as we thought, we took an outside in customer perspective to redesign that process, we were able to actually get it down to 4 clicks. And when we deployed that new configurator into production, our first Cyber Monday in production, we had 19.3% year over year sales growth, because we were able to market configurable products heavily, where you could only get them from the manufacturer website, not from a reseller. And so, being able to simplify things and look at it at a capability level, allows you to, not only, reduce the cost per unit of work, but actually improve the experience to your customers, which drives a lot of value.
Yep. Matt, any thoughts on pulling back up? I know I pulled us on a couple of different threads here. Any thoughts on this idea, business capability modeling, domain design, composable enterprise?
Yeah, and this may become a topic in and of itself, but even if you're just looking within your IT organization, and we talked earlier about, all the different operational roles or what have you, what we want is if we want to be able to do things a lot faster, let's say we want someone to be able to move to the cloud, but we have to be able to check security, we have to be able to get a database. If each of those are a capability and they have a well-defined service level and interface, and I think a big part of being composable is it's self-service. Like if there's a cloud service I want to use, I don't go talk to someone at Amazon or Microsoft and do anything. I can point to it, I can learn how to use it, I can try it, I can put it all the way into production without talking to anyone. if in my organization I want to have a capability that's truly composable, then I should be able to say, I need a server, I need a build, I need a security scan, I need these things, and I should be able to just get that from this other part of the organization without having to have a meeting, an email, a chat, a conversation. And that, as that becomes composable, you actually get closer to what Scrum's small teams type model was, because if I could say, I'm going to build this business capability and I'm only going to think about my part of the world, and there's a set of services out there in some type of a internal platform where I can say, I need a server, I need a test, I need a validation, I need each of these things. Now, all of a sudden, I can be a much smaller interdisciplinary team, but just within my set of disciplines. I don't have to take all of the other capabilities and pull them into me. I just have them available to me. So I think that it'll be probably useful at multiple levels of abstraction. Business capabilities. All right, we do shipping and we do fulfillment or what have you, but then down to, all right, I'm trying to build a system. There's 10 steps between now and production. If I wanted to put a one-page application into production, how many people would I have to talk to? How many teams? Or are these capabilities just out there that I can pull together, compose, and utilize? And I think the more that we can make those composable, the more we're going to make our organizations scalable, and the capabilities will be used for ways we didn't even imagine.
Yeah, that definitely is a broad topic. One thread that I might want to pull out of it that I thought was interesting is you talked about different levels of abstraction, because part of the challenge we have is that these words get used at different levels of abstraction. So you can abstract the idea of a capability up to marketing, finance, some of the things that Rick was talking about. Then you can think about business capabilities as they relate to the applications, right? Different subcomponents of the services that our company provides to a client. And you're talking about services or capabilities that are really at almost like at the functional level. Maybe I'll go around the room on that just for a minute. Lynn, any thoughts on maybe business capabilities or domains at different levels of abstraction before I start trying to pull us up out of the rabbit hole here?
Well, when we see a capability and can identify opportunities to deliver it in multiple contexts, you can create new lines of business. For example, a number of years ago, I ran a sell-side electronic procurement business for an industrial distributor. And we identified market opportunities to embed that capability in other companies' e-commerce systems and stores, so that we were able to sell our products that weren't in these other stores at, say, like a special order desk, that allowed our reseller partners to greatly broaden their product assortment without having to put hundreds of thousands of new products in their inventory. And we were able to deliver this to some reseller partners in 6 to 10 weeks, because the capability was encapsulated, and you could redeploy it as an asset in multiple markets.
Rick, any thoughts from your financial services upbringing?
Just a couple of things. These are systems thinking concepts, and a lot of us aren't used to thinking about businesses in these terms and applying these principles to it. So it can be really hard, even from a language standpoint, to talk to people about these, because they don't always have the hooks to hang it on. So that makes this difficult, right? To try to talk about and implement. We have to find simpler ways to describe it that put it in a frame of reference that people are going to understand. One of the things I value about it, though, is the ability to make trade-off decisions. So at any given point in time, we've only got so many people, so much capital to invest to accomplish what the business wants to accomplish. So we have to have ways of establishing priorities and figuring out where the biggest value for that is. And so by using this approach, now we can take it on a capability by capability basis, and we can figure out right now, based on the objectives we're trying to accomplish, this is what we're going to touch and this is what we're going to touch, and then kind of triage some of the other stuff out. So we're only really focusing on the things that are really important right now. And this capability, composable enterprise gives us the tools to be able to do that sort of thing. And then, one quarter down, if we start thinking on shorter cycles, by the way, we're operating in ever shorter cycles of cadence, then we can get to where we can have an objective, we can make our changes, we can sense, use metrics to see that we are getting the business value out of it that we want. Maybe next quarter we've got to reprioritize and make some more decisions, and now we can do that. So, it's an application of our agile principles and our systems thinking principles just at the enterprise level.
Yeah. So I think you gave me a good path back up to where we started this thing. So one of the things that I think is super interesting, and that maybe you guys can help me unpack here a little bit, is that this is a big problem, and it's kind of like elephant carpaccio that Alistair Coburn talks about. Like, you got to take it a slice at a time. And so one of the things that we've been exploring and doing a little bit is this idea of, we start with the idea that cloud costs are out of control. So we say, okay, well, what do we do to reduce cloud costs? Well, let's strategically extract some of the services that are driving the scalability. And then we start to wrap a team around it. And then we start to refactor it, and we start to encapsulate it, and we start to expose it via services. We align it to a business capability. And it seems like that gives us a path to take an economically driven approach, right? There's an immediate problem. We have a lot of costs in the system. We know that to extract those costs or to lower those costs, we need to extract the services that are driving the cost. And then I think that leads to a lot of the enterprise transformation stuff that we've been talking about for the last 14 years. I'll just go around the room. Lynn, any thoughts on that as a strategy?
Well, I think that at the end of the day, we want to get to a composable, enterprise, which, in LeadingAgile language would be Basecamp 4 teams, where you're organized around capabilities, that you are able to, continuously deliver working tested product to customers on a frequent basis. It's fully instrumented so that you understand how customers are using it, and you can operate it with excellence. And in order, to deliver that kind of capability, you want to establish an idealized structure, then establish the ability to predictably build it and enhance its capability. Then you want to integrate technical operations into that capability, which is, relates to a lot of this cloud discussion, where the infrastructure, all of its costs can be attributed to one and only one capability. And then finally, you integrate the business operations into the capability. So now the whole thing's on its own P&L, and you can scale it as you need to scale it and integrate it into new, business areas at will.
Rick, thank you, Lynn. Rick, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, just to draw it down to sort of a very simple statement. We moved some stuff to the cloud. It's costing us more than we thought it was going to. We could do something about this, right? We can spend a fairly short period of time sort of looking at the landscape and making some prioritization decisions. We can then pick a couple of things that have high economic return and go after them and predictably achieve that return in a manageable period of time, and then take that savings to help accelerate going through the rest of the roadmap to get a good overall financial return. And part of that's going to be a decision about where stuff runs and the transformation approach on a capability by capability basis. Maybe a couple of things actually do need to be on, bespoke infrastructure run that we own and run. Don't know, but I suspect that looking at it, most of it's going to be able to stay in the cloud and run at the savings that you thought you were going to get.
Matt, you want to close us out on this topic?
Yeah, I think, if it was just the location or just an infrastructure issue, it wouldn't actually be presenting itself across the industry like it is. So it's not location, it's not just the hardware. And, our strategies at the two ends of the pendulum of just move everything exactly as it is or rewrite everything are either too expensive to operationally run or too expensive and too time consuming to get there. So there's a middle of the road approach, just like, the Goldilocks type scenario. And, we went into the weeds a lot on some of the details of that. But in the end, we just need to break it into components and use the business as a guiding point of where we should be doing that.
Yeah. And, maybe just to add one thing to that is making sure that it's economically justified and getting the return on investment that we expect as we do it. What I think is fascinating about this conversation is that, again, whether we're talking about business capability modeling, domain design, services orientation, product extraction, like we're all fundamentally hunting the same things. It's like we have to figure out how to take big things, break them into small things, reduce dependencies between them, and get them being able to deliver in an economically advantageous way, in a way that we can inspect and adapt and learn. So I think this is just an interesting augmentation to the story that LeadingAgile has been trying to tell for the last 14 years. And one of the things that I think is neat about what we do is that we've just developed a language around how to manage the change and economically justify it and bring the organization along as we go. Maybe I'll close with one last question. Lynn, how do you see the LeadingAgile change model as being an enabler of this kind of business-driven technology transformation? Would love your thoughts.
First of all, it's objective that we can measure the value of the change. We can measure the cost of the current state. We can measure the changes in cost and delivery of value iteratively and incrementally as we change over time. And we build our backlog of improvements based on economic value and risk. And therefore, we are making fact-based decisions, and we're breaking them down into manageable chunks where you can test and verify that you're getting value in frequent iterations and increments. And that allows you to, when do you stop is you're not generating value anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's how you know when your transformation is done, when you've extracted the economic value that you're looking for out of it. That's cool. Rick, any thoughts?
Yeah, it's like knowing the bright spot in the future is not very useful if you can't predictably get there. And things like cloud financial optimization or agile transformations or modernizing a legacy application that's been built over 20 plus year. Like these are big, complicated, risky things. In many cases, companies have tried in the past to do it, maybe more than once, and been unsuccessful at doing it. I think our change approach, like Lynn was talking about, the ability to chart the path and then having the tools in place, the structure, the governance, the metrics, the teams, the backlogs, the working tested products, to be able to predictably go through this journey and get to that bright spot is it's a little bit of a secret sauce. And it's kind of fun to watch when you do it and see it happen.
Yeah, it's neat, and it works, right? And it works. Yeah. It's cool. Matt, I'll give you the final word on this one, and then we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, I mean, that's ultimately what brought me to LeadingAgile, right? I knew how to write software. I didn't know how to change organizations. And in order to do more of what we do on the software side at scale, we had to understand how to drive change in an organization. And so what I like is it's a very scalable approach that's simple, it's iterative and incremental. So it kind of hits all the principles I've grown up in, but it'll move organizations just like we can move technology, and now moving them in tandem is pretty exciting.
Yeah. So I'll tell you guys, thank you so much for doing this. I know we stepped into this without knowing exactly how we were going to do it, but I think it turned into a good conversation. I feel like there's 1,000 things that I might want to pull a thread on, but I think we're at a good wrapping place. And so for everybody who watched the 90 minutes or so that this will probably turn out to be, we really appreciate it. At the end of the day, it's like whether you're a team-based agilist or you're trying to do transformation at scale, one of the things that we talk about all the time is that, talking about culture is insufficient. Talking about agile practices is insufficient. At the end of the day, it's really about creating the conditions where we can deliver incrementally and iteratively at scale, get economic value out to our customers, learn fast, fail fast. And I just think this conversation takes it to the next level around what's really involved to really be able to do this in a deep and meaningful, economically justified way. So again, really appreciate everybody joining us for this conversation, and we plan to create a lot more of this kind of content over the coming months and years. So thanks everybody, and until next time.